Alright, YouTube, you have sort of a collective Trigglypuff thing going on right now where thousands of people have decided to go protest. And in some cases, there's sporadic acts of violence or short-term riots. In some of these larger cities, we're seeing it in Seattle, LA, certainly New York City. People especially protesting around these Trump towers around the country. I'm not surprised. I'll say again, I told you so, that if Trump won, you would see some Clinton fans. It's a small vocal minority, but you'd see them on college campuses and in some of these urban areas, at the very least holding protests and refusing sort of any sort of recognition that Trump had actually won the election. By the way, if the shoe is on the other foot, there would be people, Trump fans, some of his hardened supporters, who would refuse. They would have said the election is rigged and Hillary's illegitimate. So, you know, it works both ways. I'm immediately reminded of several things. First, I'm reminded of 2012 when a lot of the Romneyites, the more hardcore Romneyites, that really detested Obama and couldn't understand how he won re-election, said, well, he's not our president, he's like a Muslim or a Kenyan. It roughly equates to people saying now, well, Trump is a racist, sexist, misogynist idiot, so we're not going to recognize him as the actual president. Or they're pointing to the popular vote where Clinton carries like 0.01% advantage over Trump or some insanely tiny number like that. They look at the Electoral College. They don't even understand the Electoral College protects rural areas, allows them to be heard, as well as more rural states, which otherwise, if you didn't have an Electoral College, and I admit it is a double-edged sword, I admit I have my reservations about it. If you didn't have it, though, candidates would visit a few hundred large urban areas. They would completely ignore most of the productive parts of the country. It's just the way that it is. It's the system the way that it is. And Trump will come out, probably, and say, well, why didn't you change the system before this election if you were worried so much about it? But back to the riots and protests. I'm also reminded about the fact that until a couple of days ago, until the night of the election, of course, a lot of the Clinton fans were worried that Trump fans would riot or protest if she won, if Clinton won, that is. That Clinton would not immediately concede, that Trump would not immediately concede, that Trump fans would potentially get violent, at least sporadically, when he lost, because you got to remember, these people assumed they were listening to the legacy media that was lying to them the entire election, saying Clinton had it in the bag. And they expected Clinton to win in a landslide. That turned out not to be true. In fact, Trump won. Now, I predicted that. Whether I'm a hard Trump supporter or a soft Trump supporter makes no difference. I'm the latter. If Trump fucks up, by the way, if he did go full Hitler mode or something, I'd be the first one calling him out. I just don't think that that's going to happen. I've been right so far about virtually everything in this election. I think that Trump is going to settle in. He will destroy the ACA, almost certainly. His Supreme Court justices will be center-right, and honestly, my advice to him would be put a center, instead of Garland or someone like that, put someone who's ultimately a centrist for most purposes, but who is extremely in favor of the Second Amendment. That way you don't spook the centrists, you don't spook the center-left, the people who aren't protesting right now, but you also ingratiate your base. That's all he needs to do. The Supreme Court nominee that he'll put up, which will pass through the House and Senate, will not be some extreme far-rightist who wants to tear apart Roe v. Wade. That's a prediction that I'm willing to make, because it would be stupid for him to do so. He's going to use that as leverage. He'll allow the Democrats to think that they've negotiated him down to a center-rightist, and so they'll be nice and calm, and they'll potentially work with him. He might even try to reform the ACA by building a new law that actually works. I would say it's a waste of time. Just scrap it and don't replace it with anything other than a bill for pre-existing conditions, and then you've basically fundamentally solved the problem as far as government involvement can solve it. Maybe something to encourage more interstate competition. But I'm reminded that these people are hypocrites because they were so worried about Trump fans taking to the streets and refusing to acknowledge the results of the election and refusing to acknowledge Madam Hillary as the coronated Queen of the United States. But now that she's lost, these same people that were so concerned are doing exactly the same thing. This just further reinforces my view that a lot of people, the partisans and the single issue ideologues in both parties, not just within the Democratic Party, we can't just aim the blame at them, essentially don't understand what a republic is, number one. They have no respect for the Constitution, number two. They only care about it when it enforces their beliefs of how the world should operate. And they're hypocrites, number three. These same people, look at what the Democratic core right now, the neoliberals, at least the social justice warrior wing of the Democratic partisans, is saying. They're blaming whites, they're blaming white women especially, they're blaming third parties, they are blaming everybody other than Hillary Clinton for running a poor campaign, the DNC for dragging her down by being corrupt, and the Democratic lay people who abandoned the party specifically because the Democratic Party has begun blaming whites and white women and white men and straight people and third parties for all of their problems. The truth is, if they had a strong candidate, somebody who wasn't just a pandering, corrupt old lady, whose single issue of elect me boiled down to I had a menstrual cycle 20 years ago, they would have won the election. But they didn't because they jerry-rigged an unpopular, untrustworthy, corrupt, outdated candidate in as their candidate. By the way, I don't think Sanders would have won either. There were people that could have. Jim Webb could have pulled it off. Maybe even Martin O'Malley. Hillary? No. It was never likely that she was going to win. And I said this over and over and over, regardless of what the polling said. And people paid me very little heed because they looked at it and they said, well, it's got to be skewed like 10 points in Clinton's favor. That's not the way it works. As you saw, she did narrowly win the popular vote. It doesn't matter. She stacked up the vote in far blue states that she was going to win anyway, while Trump focused on a few swing states, got a very small majority of the vote there in places like Pennsylvania. That's how you win an election. That was always his strategy all along. Why do you think he went to Michigan the last day? Why do you think he went to Wisconsin? Clinton never even bothered to go there. That's number one point on her ineptitude as a campaigner. She never even visited the state of Wisconsin. It was always in play. Now, I thought that she would retain it. I thought Pennsylvania was the state that would flip against the polls, and it did. I didn't count on Wisconsin because it looked a little bit more blue. But at the same time, obviously, Trump's small-town surge really helped. These people are now saying Trump's not our president, eerily echoing what they expected Trump fans to be saying the day after, when Clinton, in their minds, inevitably won. But she didn't win, and so they're saying the same thing. They're just being hypocrites. I say this as somebody who predicted Trump's win all along, but during the primaries supported Gary Johnson, number one. Number two is not a hardened Trump fan. If Trump fucks up, I will call him out on having fucked up. But people assuming that his presidency is either going to be completely inept because, he's never been in politics before, as though politics was anything other than the art of getting elected. Well, he obviously knows about that since he got elected, so I don't see any concerns there. He's a business mogul. Business has some overlap with how you govern, honestly, especially in an economic manner. And people saying, he's in debt to foreign nations or in debt in general. So is our nation. So what? Trump's a lot less in debt than Obama's driven our debt up with the U.S. economy, with the deficit and all that crap we're having to deal with. By the way, Trump probably won't be able to completely solve that problem. It's a real doozy of a problem. Obama failed to address it. Bush didn't properly address it. Trump would be hard-pressed to fully solve the issue. He might make some inroads. He might be able to cut the deficit down to a point where we start running a surplus, but even then we've got so much debt, it's going to take a hell of a long time for that to decline. It will be difficult and painful, potentially, because you're going to need enormous amounts of spending cuts in order to balance the budget. We have too much government and too much bureaucracy. And these people that are in the streets rambling about how Trump is coming for your abortions, ranting about how Trump hates gay people, Trump was essentially the pro-gay rights candidate in this race. If you're gay or bisexual or something, you have absolutely nothing to worry about under a Trump presidency. He's not going to interfere with the Supreme Court decision there. Pence might ramble about it, but Pence is not the president of the United States. Pence is the vice president. Number two is for abortion. He has already stated, he stated this years ago, he doesn't care about the issue. All of his pandering to his fans, you see now, for instance, with the magical disappearing Muslim ban statement, which is kind of a little bit of propaganda from the left because it wasn't actually a ban on Muslims, it was a ban on immigration from certain nations that are racked with terrorism and violence, and we don't have a proper vetting system. He is correct when he says that. The fact that it disappeared from his website. Well, then you shouldn't be so concerned, should you? If you're center left or a centrist or whatever, because that was one of the big things people were concerned about. I happen to agree with his proposal there. He probably will implement it. But it's obvious you're not going to see right-wing death squads and mass deportation teams in the streets. That I predicted that as well, that would not happen. And months later, he tempered that message, and lo and behold, he was no longer calling for these things. In fact, technically speaking, he didn't to begin with. People who are trying to cast him off as somewhere to the right of Ted Cruz, as being, a literal Nazi, they don't understand politics. They don't understand campaigning, number one. They don't understand, literally, the art of the deal, number two. They don't understand reality. They don't understand checks and balances and the separation of powers that we have. And none of these people understand the concept that we are not a direct democracy. We are a republic. The states, essentially speaking, are the ones casting the votes through the Electoral College. I happen to say, I'll say it again, it's a double-edged sword, and I'm not completely on board with the Electoral College system. It'd be nice if we could develop a hybrid system so that politicians would still visit the rural states, the small-town areas, but perhaps it would be a little bit more direct than it is. That being said, though, the results of the election are in. Trump has won. Hillary Clinton has conceded. You don't have to like it any more than a lot of people liked the fact that Obama was reelected. A lot of these people spent years making a fool out of themselves, rambling about Muslims in Kenya. And I see certain elements of the far left who are the bane of their own party. There's a reason Clinton refused to court these idiots. And that was perhaps the only smart move that she ever made during most of the campaign. They're now refusing to accept the results of the election simply because they happen to disagree with the person who has been elected. That is not how a republic operates. You're going to have to deal with it for 4 years. You don't have to like it. I thought it was funny. UVM, my former university, fucking UVM, setting up like therapy sessions for people who are triggered by the election. These are grown-ass adults paying, in some cases, out of pocket unless they're trust fund babies, and I bet it's the latter that are whining about the election. If someone is so triggered by the U.S. election that they're breaking down mentally, then they're either really stupid and they believe everything they hear from the legacy media that spent months and months declaring him the next Adolf Hitler, just as certain aspects of the right-wing media proclaimed that Hillary Clinton was a literal traitor. I just think that she's a routine warmonger. I think she's like Bush or like Obama. Bush didn't start a nuclear war, although towards the end of his second term we did have a souring of relations with Russia, which Obama, trust me, has not helped in any way, shape, or form. I just think that it was too risky to elect somebody like Hillary Clinton in the world as it is today, especially when she's been on board the entire time with, oh yeah, let's fuck around in Syria. Let's screw up Libya. Haha, Gaddafi, we came, we saw, he died. Hoo-hoo, that's great. It's funny when people die, isn't it? Yes, that's what Clinton was saying all along. Oh, yeah, I'll attack Iran. Yeah, we'll have a no-fly zone in an area where the Russians are already operating from the air. I think this is a great idea. Well, I didn't think it was a great idea. I didn't vote for Donald Trump because ma white. Or because, war on men, MGTOW forever, or something like that. I voted for him to stop a nuclear war, as many others did. It's because Clinton is a known, vicious, brutal warmonger. Hydrogen Hillary, in the most literal sense. She wants a new Cold War. Thank goodness she didn't get it. And people will look back, I think, on this election, and many of those people right now who are protesting will be Trump fans by the next election, whether he runs for re-election or not. It will create a new Reagan Youth style movement. Specifically, Trump is operating in the enviable position where he's starting from the bottom, and anything he does that's not nuts looks really good by comparison. That's going to buoy his numbers up, number one. Number two, many people who dislike him, who aren't willing to give him a chance, think that he's a terribly sexist, racist, homophobic, xenophobic, whatever else sort of title you can put on him from the Clinton camp individual. None of these things are actually true. He's a garden variety quasi-paleocon, or something along those lines. It's difficult to actually classify his views beyond populism. That is exactly what our country needs right now, economically speaking anyway. You tear up these trade deals, even the left supports him on that. So when he refuses to sign the TPP and rips apart NAFTA, he'll probably get adulation from the Bernie Sanders crowd for that. It's probably going to bode well for his approval rating. But at the same time, let's not pretend that there wouldn't have been protests if Clinton won, because there would have. Now, I'm pleased with the result. I voted for Trump. And so, naturally, I'm going to have a good laugh at the expense of people that are pretending right now that the sky is falling. But we can't lose sight of the fact that it would have been similar if Clinton had won. It would have been. There would have been people who said, oh, she rigged it, so I refuse to acknowledge the results. I mentioned as well that if Trump won, as I expected he would, and he did, that Clinton fans were more likely to be violent. What Clinton's rhetoric has done is justify violence, specifically by casting her opponent as literally Hitler, as somebody who is literally deplorable and irredeemable, and so violence against him or his fans is, in their minds, I guess, okay. The more easily brainwashed segments of the population are likely to continue protesting, rioting, and conducting these sporadic and random acts of violence for some time. If you live in a heavily blue community, and it's not like, Vermont, rural and who gives a fuck. If you're living in a large city, you may want to cover up the fact that you were a Trump supporter. Not out of a sense of shame, but out of a sense of self-preservation. Wait until Trump gets the chance to ingratiate himself to the center-left, and these fringe people will shut up over time. That's my prediction anyway. If Trump does a good job, I think he will. I don't think he'll do a great job, but I think by comparing him to Obama and George W., who were both failures, he will look stellar by comparison if he just does a decent job, and he'll be remembered fondly for that fact. That's about all. Peace out.